Wise Studies presents Women in Yoga with Ruth Westoby. At Wise Studies, we are committed to illuminating the texts and teachings of the world's great contemplative traditions. Over the next 4 sessions, Ruth will explore the roles and contributions women have made in the history of ancient and modern yoga practice. In this first session, Ruth discusses themes such as power, control, and purity, types of female practitioners, and their relation to modern yoginis.
Hi, I'm Ruth Westoby, a student of yoga's history and philosophy and a yoga practitioner. I'm undertaking doctoral research at the School of Oriental and African Studies, the University of London, working on constructions of gender in Sanskrit texts on Hatha Yoga. This course for Wise Studies draws on some of the material that I have been exploring as part of these studies. I have a long way to go in my research, and whilst I have endeavoured to prepare this course faultlessly, I do hope my research will deepen over the coming years and my views develop. As I draw this material together, I realise how much more there is to consider in relation to all the issues covered, and thus I consider this a dynamic work in progress. I'd like to say a few words about my position, as this impacts the questions I ask of my material and the impressions I derive. I'm a yoga student and teacher, a research student. I am female, white, British. My first language is English, though I have been studying Sanskrit for the past 8 years or so. I've travelled to South Asia a few times, mostly to further my yoga studies, but I am clearly a Westerner drawing on the practices of a culture with a different religion and history than my own. I'm exploring material separated from me across time, space, language, culture. Yet, for the past several hundred years, the ideas and practices of yoga have become entangled and refracted through the myriad interactions between East and West. The material available to me and the questions I interrogate it with are products of my position and the intellectual climate of the times in which modern yoga has a global, embodied impact on and through millions of practitioners. Times in which yoga is mostly available as a product in a neoliberal wellness economy. Times in which structures of patriarchy are being challenged, along with what constitutes knowledge and how that is disseminated. Times in which institutionalized abuse is being called out. And times in which cultural artifacts such as yoga are contested as arbiters of identity politics, both by nationalist governments and advocates against cultural imperialism. Also, these are times in which yoga has become, in the last 20 or 30 years, a topic of inquiry within the academy. In such times, the history and philosophy of women, of women's bodies, of constructions of gendered social roles and gendered soteriological roles, soteriology means concerned with liberation from the round of rebirth. In such times, these inquiries take on different meanings and interpretations as a result of these changing contexts. Researching and thinking through the implications of such research can be both challenging and uncomfortable, and offer possibilities for change. Acknowledging the context in which this study is generated and presented gestures towards potential pitfalls and misunderstandings that may abound in my material and conclusions. Looking at the control of women and women's bodies from across time, from across cultural context, through the jaded lens of discredited patriarchy, risks assessing disparate historical epochs according to values that are alien to that time, indeed according to values that are themselves subject to flux. And this course is not a polemic against patriarchy or a call for activism. Rather more prosaically, it is a general introduction to the history of women in yoga and the principle of gender as an organising structure in the yogic body and in metaphysics and philosophy more widely. So, what is this course about? My intention for this course is to inquire into women and yoga, taking a circuitous view through the Indian tradition. What this course is not about goddess studies, but it will consider the esoteric feminine and question constructions of female power. Neither is this course aiming to tell the stories of female yoga practitioners, though I will present some typologies of women. Fascinating and detailed studies have been done in these areas, and much research is ongoing. There is a bibliography appended to this course which details some of the resources consulted in the compilation of this course. Should you want to pursue particular topics further, please do check out those resources. So, the organisation of this course. Episode 1 includes what I've said so far by way of introduction. Also in this section, I'd like to say a little about my methodology before diving into the themes which recur in this material. These themes include desire, power, control, purity, and liberation. These themes invest women, or words about women, with certain often stereotypical characteristics that ideas of yoga both utilise and resist. Episode 2. The typologies of women in yoga include actual women, ascetics, the ideal of the perfect wife, goddesses, yoginis, devotees. And I'd like to say a little about the elusive category of actual women practicing yoga. This final category I will return to and develop later in the 4th episode. This typology indicates broad categories, shows the difficulty in asserting historic female yoga practitioners, and explains the next inquiry into philosophy as a way of seeking out women, whether real or imagined. Episode 3. In the 3rd episode, I step backwards and outwards to look at gendered philosophy. This is a large topic, and I explore it specifically insofar as it may be relevant and helpful for thinking about yoga. I consider the use of gender as bipolar principles that are presented with perennial explanatory potential. Does this gendered bipolarity explain the motive force of yoga practices? I look at the role of gender in creation myths or cosmogonies, for what this might reveal of the internalization of the macrocosmic universe within the ritualized yogic body of the practitioner. I also present gender as an explanatory paradigm in philosophic systems such as Sankhya. Through these topics, we can see that gender is considered to have an explanatory function, and I believe this can provide a conceptual framework for the use of gender in yoga. This 3rd episode then turns to an analysis of the yogic body as characterized by gender. I give a general introduction to the yogic body and look at yogic body maps of Shiva and Shakti, the serpent energy Kundalini, and Bindu and Rajas, which are the often less ontologically real categories of semen and female procreative fluid or menses. Rich questions to explore are why the yogic body is conceived on a gendered paradigm, what this means for the praxis of yoga, and what the role of actual women is in these practices. I hope to frame some of these questions, but will not present a complete picture. In the 4th episode, I return to the inquiry into women in Hatha Yoga, which I will introduce within this 1st episode. Did women practice yoga in pre-modern India? If they did, why? For freedom in this world or the next? Did they practice the same techniques for the same purposes as their male counterparts? Ethnographic studies have been and continue to be conducted via interviews with female practitioners, yet it can be awkward to project these findings backwards in time. I will then present some reflections on women in the global modern yoga scene by way of bringing material into the present period. This contemporary section considers gender in globalized yoga, both drawing together threads from the preceding more historical discussion and introducing new elements. This section will consider the predominance of women in modern yoga, the roles of women within the yoga market, and consider the extent to which yoga is empowering or constraining, both in terms of socioeconomics and in relation to soteriology or spirituality. This last section will also analyse the fixation of public and private discourse with the female body and consider this body fetishization in relation to a feminist analysis and a neoliberal analysis. This section will summarise the cases of abuse of power and consider to what extent these have a gendered dimension. This section will consider the conspicuous absence in all this, which is men and masculinity, an absence which I will briefly demarcate. These are important areas of study in their own right. Whilst I'm focusing on women and the feminine principle in yoga, this largely derives meaning in relation to its other, men and masculinity. Hence, a completely balanced study would require an integrated treatment. For the purposes of my research, I'm focusing on women and the female as a subaltern or revisionist history, by drawing attention to a historically under-researched area. Scholars such as Joseph Alter, Carl Olson, and John Powers have been working in the area of men, masculinity, and celibacy. Finally, this section will consider whether an implication of yoga studies and women's studies is a rallying call for social justice, and whether such research provides tools for rethinking the themes of this course: desire, power, control, purity, and liberation. There is a pushback against abuse coming from whistleblowers, information campaigns such as Me Too, powered by social media, and revised pedagogical approaches such as trauma-informed yoga. So that's the overview of the 4 sections: introduction, typologies, metaphysics and yogic body, Hatha Yoginis, and the contemporary globalized yoga scene. And now to get into the detail of this episode.